My son called in the middle of the night. Dad, I'm at the police station. Victor beat me up and then filed a report saying I attacked him. The phone vibrated insistently. Captain David Miller answered on the second ring, a habit forged over years of night shifts and emergency call-outs. Dad, I'm at the precinct. Ethan's voice was a hoarse whisper. My stepfather, Victor, he beat me and then filed a complaint against me. They believe him, not me. The air in the room grew thick, like cement. David stood up, already throwing on his uniform jacket. Which precinct? The West Side. The desk sergeant is Melendez, I think. Hang in there. I'll be there in 20 minutes. The West Side precinct greeted him with dim fluorescent light and the clatter of a printer. The officers behind the counter straightened up when they saw the captain's bars on his collar. One of them swallowed hard. Good evening, Captain, the desk sergeant began, jumping to his feet. Where is my son? David didn't raise his voice, which only made it more unnerving. We were taking a statement. The boy's stepfather. Mr. Victor Sterling, the sergeant stammered, faltering under the gaze of those gray eyes. He says his stepson attacked him, broke his phone, made threats. A neighbor confirmed it. We have photos of scratches. On the stepfather. And where is the actual victim? In an interview room. We're drawing up the report. No one speaks to a minor without their legal guardian present, David said evenly. You know that. Open the door. The sergeant unlocked it. On a hard plastic chair, with his arms crossed, sat Ethan. 16 years old, nearly as tall as his father. He had a habit of slouching, a result of heavy school backpacks and the weight of others' stares. A fresh, spreading bruise was blossoming under his left eye. On his forearm were marks shaped like the grip of an adult hand. Dad, his voice broke. He quickly turned away, as if ashamed of that single word. David leaned in, not touching him, just looking closely. It was immediately clear, the blow was 3 to 4 hours old. The angle was from the lower right, meaning the attacker was taller. The finger marks showed a sharp, backward grip. This wasn't a fight had been pinned against a wall. David felt that old, soul-chilling resolve switch on inside him. Who did this? He asked quietly. Ethan swallowed. I told him I wanted to go to the game on Saturday with you, not with him. He snapped, grabbed me, threw me, and said, you need to be taught some discipline. I pushed him away, and he hit me. David turned to the desk sergeant. Immediately. Get a paramedic and file an injury report. Videotape the condition of his face, forearm, and neck. Call a detective from the juvenile division and bring me the officer who took the stepfather's statement. A neighbor confirmed it, David swore to himself. Neighbors readily confirmed any convenient story if a respectable person gave them the nod. He'd seen 100 of them. The confident smile, the air of simple justice. I was just looking out for him. Victor, Sarah's new husband, was exactly that type. Overly expensive watch, perfectly pressed clothes, all the right words, and not a single thing out of place. The door opened. He walked in, smooth as a polished stone. Concern was plastered on his face, but his eyes held a cold satisfaction. Captain Miller, he began, extending a hand as if they were at a business function. I am so sorry. The boy. He's uncontrollable. I was forced to defend myself. I have scratches. He showed the thin red lines on his wrist. The neighbor heard the threats. David didn't shake his hand. Who are you calling the boy? My son, he asked, his voice so sharp that even the sergeant flinched. But I'm like a father to him, Victor started. You are his mother's husband. He only has one father. David turned to the desk sergeant. Bring me the incident log. I want the time the complaint was filed and the witness statements. Then, looking at Victor again, he said, "And you will come with me to an empty interview room for 15 minutes. Off the record. Just you, me, and the door." Victor smirked. "This is coercion, Captain Miller. It's not right to abuse your uniform, especially in front of a child." Ethan instinctively pulled his head into his shoulders. David placed a hand on his shoulder, steady and calm. "Son, sit down. Drink some water. I'll be right here." The interview room smelled of old linoleum and dampness. David closed the door and stood opposite him, a narrow table between them. "Look," he said evenly, "here's how this is going to go. Right now, the paramedics will document my son's injuries. The detective will note the consistency of his testimony. I will provide the text messages with his mother where he asked to live with me on weekdays. I also have an audio recording of you screaming at him in the kitchen a month ago. The neighbor who confirmed your story has already given 2 identical, copy-pasted statements for the local beat cop. His testimony will fall apart in court in 10 minutes. Are you still sure you want to play the self-defense card?" Victor paled slightly, but the smile remained fixed on his face. "I am a law-abiding, tax-paying citizen. You get your salary from my taxes. And ultimately, I have connections, Captain Miller. I don't lose these kinds of games." "The games end where a child is involved," David replied. "You made a big mistake. You touched my son." He threw the door open as if firing a shot. The sound cracked through the hallway. "Sergeant," he said, his voice crisp and dry. "Draw up the inspection report. A medical examination now. Then the hospital for photo documentation and X-rays. After that, he is to be temporarily released into my custody pending the investigation. Notify Child Protective Services and call Detective Ivanova. She's already aware of the family conflict." The desk sergeant nodded so quickly it seemed he was afraid of being late. Ethan stood up, met his father's gaze, and for the first time that evening, he exhaled as if pulling a rusty nail from his chest. At that moment, David's phone rang. Sarah. He had seen that name on his screen 1,000 times over the past years during night shifts, at school concerts, in court hearings about visitation rights. Always with a different subtext. "Hello," he answered. "What happened? Where's Ethan?" Her voice trembled with hurt, fear, and a habitual disbelief. "He's on his way to be examined at the precinct. He has a black eye and grip marks on his arm." "But..." Sarah tried to find an excuse. "Maybe at school. Maybe during practice. Vic said they had an argument, but..." "Sarah," he interrupted softly, without anger. "You're going to the hospital. Not for your husband, but for your son. And you're going to look him in the eye. I'm not asking you, I'm informing you." He hung up to avoid hearing the words he already knew by heart. "You were always too harsh. Vic is different. He provides stability. Ethan provokes him." All of it dissolved in the face of one simple fact, the violet bruise under his child's eye. The paramedic arrived quickly, a woman with a blonde braid and confident hands. She palpated his cheekbone, noted the tenderness, took a photo with a ruler for scale, and asked him to roll up his sleeve. The marks there were already darkening, like welts from a belt. "An X-ray, just in case," she said. "The injuries are fresh, 3 to 4 hours old." She caught herself, glancing at David's uniform. "Sorry, I'll just do my job." "Do it," he nodded. Ethan shrugged and gave a crooked smile. "Dad, really? I just told him about the game, and he exploded. I didn't mean to." "Stop apologizing for someone else's anger," David said. "This is not your fault." When they walked out into the hallway, Victor was leaning against the wall, speaking quickly and quietly into his phone, a faint smirk on his face. "Yes, file it as threats. Aggressive. Captain is applying pressure. He met David's gaze and quickly looked away. It wasn't fear, it was the irritation of a predator whose hunt had been interrupted. "Let's go," David said to his son. "First the hospital, then home. To your place." "What about Mom?" Ethan asked quietly. "Mom will come, and she will face the truth. I'll help her." Outside, a sharp March wind blew, smelling of wet asphalt and fresh donuts from a nearby shop. David opened the car door for his son, got behind the wheel, and closed his eyes for a second, affording himself the luxury of a single breath. Inhale, exhale. Then he started the engine. He didn't need a siren. He had something stronger, the knowledge that from this point on, nothing would go according to Victor's script. In the car, Ethan was silent, looking at his reflection in the dark glass, touching his cheek cautiously as if to check if it was all a dream. David turned on the heat and tossed his service cap onto his son's lap like a child's hat, like a shield, like a promise. "Dad," Ethan said, very quietly. "What if he does it again?" "He won't do it again," David answered. "He will never do it again." The light turned yellow at the intersection. David slowed down and suddenly caught the headlights of a black SUV in his rearview mirror, emerging slowly from a side street. He recognized the license plate. The windshield was too clean. The timing was too perfect. David smirked. Of course. Sarah had never realized she was confusing love with security. It wasn't about flowers and romance, it was about stability, timely mortgage payments, a late dinner without news of shootouts, a man who knew how to fix a faucet and explain why it was profitable to hire his company for a contract. Victor was the perfect embodiment of her choices. Neatly trimmed hair, a suit without a single crease, a smile that erased anxiety. When she got the call, her heart had refused to believe it. Her son at a police station. A bruise. Ethan had always told the truth. Sometimes too bluntly, sometimes awkwardly, but always the truth. She wiped her tears, gathered her documents, and thought it would all be cleared up. The child got confused. Someone misunderstood. It was all just emotions. She never imagined that 1,000 small remarks and missed signals would coalesce into a picture of violence. In the hospital corridor, David's voice was calmer than she would have liked. She saw Ethan in a chair, his face pale, the dark stain under his eye, the bruises on his arm. These weren't marks from a schoolyard fight. This was something else, vicious, adult. "Mom," he mumbled and turned away. "I said I wanted you to come to the game." He said he was the father, and... Ethan faltered, as if the words were stuck in his chest. "How did this happen?" she asked, trying to sound calm. Ethan described it matter-of-factly. Sarah listened, and at the end of each sentence, excuses tore through her mind. "He's my husband. He couldn't have. Ethan always exaggerates. He was tired from work." But when her son's words aligned with the bruises she was seeing and the medical report, the excuses began to crumble. She glanced up and saw not only resolve in David's eyes, but also reproach. "You chose him." It was a painful thought that brought an immediate wave of nausea. How could she have allowed her child's safety to become a secondary concern? When they stepped outside, the air was cold. David took his son's hand, holding it firmly, as if reminding himself and everyone else, "This is my son." Sarah stood on the sidewalk, and all the familiar arguments, how hard it is to start over, who will help with the mortgage, what will people think, shriveled into a single truth. Her child had been beaten, and she hadn't seen it in time. David helped Ethan into the car. The boy turned and looked at his mother. In his gaze was both hurt and hope. She stood there until their car disappeared under the glow of the streetlights. The silence that fell was so abrupt it felt as though the city was holding its breath. The next morning, David woke up before his alarm. His son was asleep on the living room sofa under an old blanket. There was a crease from the pillow on his cheek and stripes from a bandage on his arm. For the first time in a long while, David looked at Ethan and didn't see a teenager to argue with. He saw a child he had to protect from adults. He quietly put the kettle on and picked up his phone. Messages, missed calls, notifications. Victor had already started to act. The first step is always a lie, David knew. Then comes the pressure. Sure enough, at 8 a.m., the desk sergeant from the West Side precinct called. "Captain Miller, we have a situation here. Ethan's stepfather has filed a counter-complaint." "Against whom?" "Against you and your son. For threats, assault, and property damage. He says the two of you broke into his house last night and tried to, quote, carry out vigilante justice." David gave a short, joyless laugh. "Does he have proof?" "A photo of a door. With a broken lock." Clever. He even knew which lock the one on the old storage closet the handyman had been asked to replace for months. "I'll be there," David said and hung up. Sarah woke up to a crash downstairs. Victor was in the kitchen, talking loudly and confidently on the phone. "Yes, I've already filed it. Let them try to play the protector now. Let them figure out which one of us is the psycho. I have connections. I'm going to make an example out of this." She stood in the doorway, listening, feeling her body clench with fear. "Vic, why?" she asked when he finished. "Because he's not a saint. Let him see what it feels like to have your word questioned." He stepped close, too close. "You think I'm going to let some cartoon hero destroy my family? I am the man of this house, Sarah, and he's just a washed-up cop clinging to his authority." Sarah recoiled. "Ethan is a child. You beat him." "I was raising him," he snarled. "A man needs to know discipline. And if you're not capable of understanding that, then maybe you need a lesson too." His hand twitched. It didn't strike, but the air between them grew thick. Sarah grabbed her bag and walked out without looking back. On the street, for the first time in a long time, the cold felt like a relief. At the precinct, David demanded a copy of Victor's statement. The report was written neatly, in someone else's hand. Time of filing, 10:45 p.m. At that time, Ethan had been at his house, drinking tea and reading a comic book. The lock was damaged. "Yes, I have a report." "Show me." "Well, I haven't officially filed the report yet, but I have the photo." David walked over to the sergeant and said quietly, "Run a check on the photo's metadata." 5 minutes later, the sergeant returned, scratching the back of his head. "The photo was taken at 7:13 this morning." "Of course," David nodded. Phones often accidentally jump 6 hours ahead when you're inventing an alibi. The desk sergeant looked down. At home, David pulled out an old box with a voice recorder and flash drives. He never erased old recordings. Sometimes, habits save lives. He inserted a flash drive. Muffled voices came through the speakers: "Sarah, Victor, Ethan. From the night it all began. He's being insolent to me." Victor's voice shouted. "He's 15. He has a right to say what he doesn't like," Sarah replied. "This is my house. My rules. Our house." "A mistake," he roared. "In my house, you live by my rules." David listened, feeling the blood rush to his face. Sarah's voice, trembling, trying to de-escalate. Victor's voice, heavy and confident, like the crunch of a boot on gravel. He understood then. This wasn't a flare-up, it was a system. And if he didn't stop this man today, tomorrow he would finish the job and beat someone to death. That same day, he went to see an old colleague, Detective Frank Russo, with whom he had once worked on a bribery case. "Frank, I need an official investigation opened into a case of assault. I have medical reports, audio, and a minor victim." "David, do you understand what you're getting into? This Victor character has already been to see the chief. He's trying to paint you as a man taking revenge on his ex-wife. Let him try. I have facts. Frank sighed. All right. But be careful. He's not just a construction contractor. He has connections at City Hall. Don't get yourself into trouble. David nodded. He wasn't afraid. He just knew there was no turning back now. Meanwhile, Sarah sat in her car near Ethan's school. She watched her son walk out after classes, tall, a little withdrawn, with a look of indifference. He noticed her but didn't smile. Get in, she said. He did. She was silent, and in that pause lay all her mistakes. I'm leaving him, she finally breathed. For real. Today. Ethan didn't answer. But as they drove past the park, she noticed his shoulders relax for the first time in a long while. That evening, Victor called her. Do you really want to tear this family apart? His voice was cold. Or do you just want me to show the world what kind of mother you've been? Because I can. Are you threatening me? I'm warning you. He hung up. Late that night, there was a knock on David's apartment door. He opened it. On the threshold stood Ben Carter, a neighbor and childhood friend, now a lawyer. Listen, he said. I checked the databases. This Victor guy is definitely involved in some shady city contract deals. It stinks. And by the way, he filed a complaint against you with Internal Affairs. Excellent, David replied calmly. That means tomorrow we can officially look into his connections. And how are you going to prove all this? David placed the voice recorder on the table. I have his voice. And I have a boy he can no longer touch. That's enough. But the next morning, David realized the war was just beginning. An article appeared on social media, jealous police officer Harris's ex-wife's husband. There was a blurred but recognizable photo of Ethan. A comment, supposedly from a family friend, read, the teenager is aggressive. Ungrateful. The father is using him for revenge. David slowly folded the newspaper, opened the window, and lit a cigarette. He knew that now he wasn't just up against one man. He was up against a system that knew how to protect its own. He exhaled the smoke and said quietly to himself, all right, then. We play like adults. And he added in his thoughts, now he'll feel what it means to touch a cop's son. The days blurred into one endless corridor of phone calls, reports, and nervous coffee. David lived by a principle he had learned in the service, if you can't sleep, act. He understood he was playing not only against Victor, but also against those who were accustomed to turning a blind eye for the sake of convenience. He started small, with documents. Through Frank Russo, the detective, he managed to get access to the procurement database where Victor's company, Vestroy, was listed. A simple name, dozens of contracts for public improvements, roof repairs, and paving courtyards. On paper, everything looked perfect until David cross-referenced the contract dates with payments and reports. The same estimates, copied word for word, shell companies, and recurring official stamps. He knew that if he exposed these schemes, the blow would land higher up than just one contractor, but he had no intention of backing down. During this time, Ethan lived with his father. He went to school, quiet and focused, but became calmer with each passing day. Sometimes David noticed his son staring out the window for long periods, as if waiting for his mother to call. She called rarely, shamefully, with short phrases, "How are you?" "I'm working on it. Everything will be okay." Ethan's replies were terse, but David could see that a flicker of hope remained. A week later, Frank Russo called him. "David, brace yourself. Victor has hired Arthur Crane as his lawyer." The Arthur Crane. The very one. The one who loves to play dirty. They're going to portray you as a vengeful ex using your official position. They're already preparing a complaint for the district attorney's office. Let them, David cut him off. I have the facts. Meanwhile, Sarah was living as if in a minefield. He would let himself in with his own key, leaving gifts, bouquets, and notes that read, "You're still my wife. Remember that." She hid the scraps of paper in a drawer, afraid to throw them away, as if they were evidence. One evening, he was there when she got home from work. The kitchen smelled of wine. "Did you file for divorce?" he asked evenly. "Yes. A mistake. I don't want to live with a man who raises a hand to my son." He laughed. The court date was set for April. By then, David had gathered everything: proof of the beatings, financial fraud, witness testimonies, and transaction records for Victor's deals. On the day of the hearing, the courtroom was packed. Journalists, lawyers, even some City Hall employees, everyone wanted to see how a police captain would stand up to an influential businessman. The judge was a woman in her 50s with a stern face and a voice like a razor's edge. She opened the hearing. Case number 412. Plaintiff, David Miller. Defendant, Victor Sterling. First, the lawyers spoke. Crane was a spectacle of false sincerity. My client has become a victim of a smear campaign. He cared for a child whom his own father abandoned for a career. Now, a case has been fabricated against him. David listened in silence, motionless. Then he stood up. "Your Honor, I am not seeking revenge. I want the court to acknowledge the obvious. This man systematically subjected a minor to violence. He placed the photographs, the doctor's report, and the audio recorder on the table. Victor's voice filled the room from the speakers. This is my house. My rules. You're nobody, and I'm going to teach you." A hush fell over the courtroom. The judge looked up. "Is that your voice, Mr. Sterling?" Victor swallowed. "It could be edited." "Then please explain how the date of the recording coincides with the medical report," Frank Russo interjected, now officially present as a witness. David watched Victor's confidence evaporate, but he hadn't given up yet. "I have proof that Captain Miller was seeking revenge. Here are the articles he himself circulated." He threw printouts of the fake online articles onto the table. The judge glanced at them and said calmly, "This material has not been verified as credible." And then David played his final card, the documents on the financial fraud. He knew a trial for assault was one thing, but corruption was something everyone feared. Here are Victor Sterling's signatures on contracts with fictitious companies. The sums matched the payments made to his personal account. Someone in the courtroom gasped. The judge frowned. "Have you submitted this data to the district attorney's office?" "Yes, and copies have already been registered." Crane tried to object, but the judge raised her hand. "Enough." After 3 hours of questioning, testimony, and documents, the verdict was delivered in a dry but firm tone. Victor Sterling is found guilty of assault on a minor and fraud on a particularly large scale. He was sentenced to 7 years in prison. Sarah, sitting in the back row, was crying. David turned to her. "He should never have touched Ethan," he said quietly. "And no one else will ever dare to." The judge struck her gavel. This court is adjourned. After the trial, David went outside. Ethan was standing by the doors, clutching his backpack, and for the first time in a long time, he was smiling a real smile. "Is it over?" he asked. "Yes," David said. "Now a normal life begins." But a week later, Crane filed an appeal, and while the court prepared to review the new motion, Victor managed to post bail. He was free again. Frank called David that evening. "Be careful. Men like him don't forgive." "I know," David replied. He looked at his son, asleep in the next room, and added, "If he comes, I'll be ready." The rain started around midnight. David sat in the kitchen, drinking cold tea and staring out the window. Ethan was already asleep. An anxious silence filled the house, as if the night itself was waiting for something to happen. He could feel it in his bones. It wasn't over. This kind of quiet only came before a visit from someone who refused to accept defeat. That evening, he had deliberately left the light on in the hallway and the door unlocked from the deadbolt. A trap had to look convincing. On the table lay his phone, with the camera app open, and a voice recorder, both on. Everything was being recorded. Victor had been released on bail 3 days ago officially, pending a review of his case, unofficially, thanks to a call to the right people. David knew this man wouldn't go away quietly. He was too proud, too accustomed to winning. The clock showed 12:47 a.m. when headlights flashed in the yard. An engine died, and a minute later, he heard footsteps on the wet asphalt. A single set of steps, slow and confident, a predator who knows his prey is home. David stood up, checked the pistol in his holster, then put it back. He wasn't going to shoot. The lock turned quietly, and the door creaked open. "You didn't even change the lock," Victor's voice sounded. "Were you expecting me?" David stood by the window, not turning around. "You needed to finish what you started," he said calmly. "So here I am. No uniform, no backup. Just you and me." Victor closed the door behind him. "You think you can hide behind your badge?" he hissed. "You framed me for all of this. You destroyed my life." "No," David replied, finally turning to face him. "You destroyed your own life the day you raised your hand to a child." "Your child?" Victor yelled. "You're just jealous that Sarah chose me." He took a step forward. A blade flashed in his hand. "Put the knife down," David said evenly. "Or what? You'll arrest me? Film me on my knees begging for forgiveness?" Victor sneered. "No. Tonight, I decide who's guilty." He lunged forward. David managed to jump back, grabbing a chair to block the strike. The blade slid across the wood, leaving a deep gouge. Victor was breathing heavily, his eyes wild. He tried to strike again. David knocked the knife from his hand, it skittered under a cabinet. A second later, Victor was on the floor, his face pressed into the parquet. "It's over," David said, pinning him down. "The end. You think you've won?" he choked out. "I'll make sure you lose everything." David switched on the main light and took a step back. On a shelf, the red light of the camera was blinking. "It's all recorded, Victor. Every word, every move." Victor tried to get up, but David pulled out his phone and made a call. 911 dispatch, this is Captain Miller. I have an armed assault in progress at my apartment. Suspect is Sterling, Victor. He's alive. Yes, he's been apprehended. He spoke calmly, almost indifferently, as if reporting someone else's incident. While they waited for the police to arrive, Victor sat on the floor, his back against the wall. "You wanted to kill me, didn't you?" he said suddenly. "You just did it elegantly, with papers, evidence, and courts." "No," David answered. "I wanted you to see yourself for what you are, but you've always had a problem with mirrors." At that moment, Ethan peeked into the room. "Dad," he whispered. David turned. "It's okay. Go back to your room." The boy looked at Victor, the man who had so recently commanded, humiliated, and terrified him, and said quietly, "You won't touch us anymore." Those words sounded louder than the sirens that were already approaching. The police processed everything quickly. Victor was led away in handcuffs, wet and disheveled, but still trying to maintain his posture. "You'll regret this," he threw over his shoulder. "You're all the same, thinking the law will save you." David didn't answer. He knew it wasn't the law that saved you, but the people who weren't afraid to defend it. A year passed. Ethan graduated from high school with honors and was planning to study law. Sarah had rented an apartment nearby. They saw each other infrequently, but without tension. She had learned to look people in the eye again, without looking away. Victor received a combined sentence of 8 years for assault and fraud. A short blurb appeared in the newspaper: former City Hall contractor convicted. Investigation aided by Police Captain Miller. That evening, David sat on his balcony, listening to Ethan talking with friends below. The laughter was vibrant, light, and free of fear. Sarah sent him a short text message, "Thank you. You didn't just save our son that night. You saved me too." He stood up, turned off the light, and looked out the window. In the reflection, he saw a calm face, tired eyes, and behind him, a warm home where no one shouted anymore. He said quietly to himself, "A real father doesn't seek revenge. He protects." And for the first time in a very long time, he allowed himself to relax.